Hey, welcome back to My Classic Car, the show for the car nut in all of us. This week we're honored to be guests at the Mustang Club of America's 20th anniversary celebration here at the Atlanta Motor Speedway. MCA was founded back in 1976 by a small group here in the Atlanta area. Over the years, the club has developed into a worldwide group dedicated to preserving the legacy of the Mustang. In a few minutes, we'll show you some of the outstanding cars that have gathered here for this mammoth Mustang celebration. But first, let's shift gears a little bit and continue our pony car theme with a quick trip to the Chevrolet stables for this week's Classic Designers and Engineers feature.
Don Yenko was a Chevrolet dealer from Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, who was a very, very astute businessman.
Very successful racer, Chevy man through and through. Raced Corvettes, raced Corvairs.
His two great loves in life were playing jazz piano and flying an airplane. Out of his small Chevrolet dealership in Canonsburg, Pennsylvania, came some of the finest cars of the muscle car era.
Don Yenko's earliest project was the Corvair Stinger in 1965. He built those in 65 and 66. And various modifications made these little Corvairs race-ready rockets.
Matter of fact, some of those still run to race today in SCCA across the country and still winning. And they were a good car. I mean, it was the beginning of that genre of car.
And then in '67, he started transplanting 427 engines into Camaros.
Yenko Camaro production was always very limited. Early cars in the 50 to 60 range in 67 and 68. Of course, the big controversy involves the 1969 production when Yenko Chevrolet began using the COPO pipeline, the central office production order option, to actually order factory-equipped 427 Camaros to be delivered, and there they were converted into Yenko Super Cars with all their tape stripes and various emblems. Over the years, there's been this ongoing battle as to how many were actually built.
Perhaps the original tape from my interview with Don Yenko will shed some light on whether or not there were 201 or 500. This is Don Yenko speaking.
In 1968, we did our transplants. 1969, all the cars were Copos, there were 500 of them.
In 1969, Yenko started also offering 427 Chevelles and briefly offered 427 Novas.
For 1970, entrepreneur that Don was, visionary that he was, he saw a loophole in what was going on. The insurance industry was trying everything it could to kill the muscle car, especially big block muscle cars. So Don talked with the factory, and he had Chevrolet install the LT1 Corvette engine in a mundane little Nova, Chevy 2 if you will. And when you bought that car, you went to your insurance agent and said, I just bought a Nova with a 350. And your insurance agent smiled and patted you on the back for being a good citizen and wrote you the standard rate. In later years, he built Stinger Vegas, some with turbochargers, some without. But that was about the last project car that he was really involved in. At Don's funeral, during the service at the funeral home, which I attended immediately after his death, everyone sat there and listened to a 20-minute tape of Don Yenko playing jazz piano as per his last will and testament. That was one of the things that he mandated in his will.
The out-and-out Camaro that you always remember is the Yenko Camaro, and if it wasn't for him, you wouldn't remember that car. The Camaro would be popular, it would be known, but the Yenko Camaro was the one on the cover of CarCraft, it was the one on the cover of Hot Rod. That was the car that you remember. That's the car everybody wants.
Welcome back to My Classic Car and the Mustang Club of America's 20th anniversary celebration here at the Atlanta Motor Speedway. As you can see and hear, part of this celebration consists of an open track event in addition to the traditional showing and judging.
Well, actually, the Mustang Club of America began here in Atlanta, out at Stone Mountain. And there, a bunch of guys got together, had a great event. They called it a Grand National, and that began the Mustang Club of America. And here we are back 20 years later in the same city, because that's where it did begin. That was our theme, come back to Atlanta.
How many cars were at Stone Mountain?
If I remember correctly, it was somewhere just over 100 cars.
What do you have today?
We are exceeding over 1,000 cars this weekend here.
What do you think of this 20th anniversary show?
This is great. I think anybody that owns a Mustang, has any connection with a Mustang, even likes a Mustang, should be in attendance this weekend to see the array of Mustangs, from the early Mustangs to the latest, the modified drag racing cars as well as the road racing cars. It's something for everybody.
After our interview, Steve showed me one of his latest creations, the S281, a gorgeous Saleen Mustang with a roadster kit that gives the car the appearance of being a two-seater. I wasted no time in trying to get my order in. Well, they're stunning. I'm just going to have to get my order in so I don't have to wait too long, I guess.
Good. What color do you want?
Well, you know, I don't know. It's hard to pass up a red one. The blue's nice, but a red one. Actually, I've seen it in black, and I think that's one of the most sinister-looking colors, certainly. The two constants in the volatile world of muscle car values are engine size and production figures. Rare muscle cars with big cubes bring really big bucks, which is definitely the case with the Boss 429 Mustang. Prices on these beasts currently range from 30 to 60 grand depending on their condition. When we started looking for a Boss 429 to feature on the show, we really had no idea how hard it would be to find an excellent example and an owner who was willing to drive it. Many owners don't drive their cars, and some don't even start the engines. The cars have become that valuable. But then we contacted Greg Montgomery, the owner of this beautiful red Boss 429. Greg is the son of legendary drag racer Ohio George Montgomery, and he grew up watching his father race. Some of you will remember that Ohio George campaigned a fiberglass 69 Mustang powered by a twin turbocharged Boss 429 engine that was known as the Mr. Gasket Gasser. When Greg restored his Boss 429, NOS parts, such as Boss cylinder heads left over from the 69 season, helped create a near-perfect restoration. I asked Greg to show me his Boss 429 during a trip to Ohio last summer. Now, I understand these cars actually started out as Mach 1s.
That's correct. All the cars were made in Dearborn assembly line with 428s, and they were shipped to Carcraft to have the modifications done.
And they were R-code Mach 1s. What's an R-code?
It has the 31 spline axles, the Detroit locker rear end with a nodular case, and also the external oil cooler in front of the radiator.
So, now, from an interior standpoint, though, they're really a standard Mach 1 interior with any of the Mach 1 designations removed. Is there any other differences?
That's correct, Dennis. The only differences that are in there are the knobs underneath the dash that control the choke, the manual choke, and also a knob to control the air flapper valve and the hood scoop.
Well, that's right. This scoop is truly functional. So many of them in that day were just dummy scoops, but this one's manually controlled.
That's correct. In fact, I'd like to demonstrate.
Oh, I'd love to see it. Oh, yeah. So you can manually close it when it rains and open it up when you're running.
Yes.
Now, other than that, there weren't too many things like the 302. You didn't have any of the Larry Shinoda striping. In fact, about all you had was this 429 decal.
Yeah, they kept the flashiness on this car to a very minimum. And that's one decal on each fender.
And that's about it.
That's it.
Of course, then the big thing about this car, and it is a big thing, is in fact the Boss 429 engine. Let's have a look at that.
Okay.
Now, that's about as packed in an engine compartment as you'll ever see an engine.
That's correct.
There had to be some major surgery go on to get this in here.
Yeah, actually, the engine is 31 inches wide, and before any modifications were done, they only had 29 inches to work with. So they had to do a lot of modifications to get the engine to fit, such as moving the shock towers outward on both sides, specially constructed inner fender panels, and upper control arms on the suspension are all fabricated to assist this motors.
Now, moving the shock towers out also moved the front wheels out?
Yes, it did. In fact, the front wheels have almost an inch wider track than the rear wheels.
And I've got to believe the springs are a lot heftier.
Yes, they are.
Because this is a massive engine, and most of the weight of this car, or a lot of it, sits up here in front.
Yeah, close to 55% is over the front axle.
Now, the 429 engine, huge, gorgeous, but they actually had a couple different ones that they put in to begin with. The early ones came out with what were called an S-code engine.
That's correct. They had the heavier NASCAR connecting rods and several internal modifications that were different, but the easiest way to tell is the early cars, the first 230, had magnesium valve covers, whereas these are aluminum.
And this would be a T-code engine.
This is a T-code. This is a June 69 date car, so it would have the aluminum.
And it went on to be the engine they put in the 1970 Boss 429s.
That's correct.
Now the thing that's conspicuously absent here from most cars is the battery. There is no battery here.
No.
And for obvious reasons, space constraints for one, it was put in fact in the trunk in the 429. Is that right?
That's correct.
Now other than the space reasons, was there any other reason they dropped it back here?
With so much weight over the front axle, they needed to get the weight to the rear, and this was one way of helping that.
And those were pretty large batteries in that day.
It had a 9-foot long cable that ran directly to the front solenoid.
Now this was also, you have a space saver spare.
That's correct. It was the first Mustang to make the space saver spare standard, and the reason for that is the tires and wheels are so large it would take up all usable space in the trunk.
Well, Greg, you've done a fabulous job. This is a meticulous restoration and a real preservation of a piece of muscle car history. Greg's boss had not been driven since the restoration was completed several weeks before. In fact, he had no plans to drive the car until we contacted him.
I love this car. I want this car.
Greg lives not far from the Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Dayton, and an old runway made a great location to bring the boss back to life. Now is that a glass scoop on there?
Yeah, it's fiberglass. They had trouble keeping the paint on the scoops in 69 and 70. They made them all black.
When our drive was over, I noticed that unmistakable gleam in the eye of a young boy who was finally driving the car he'd always dreamed of.